The things that happened in that cabin are burned into my head. I'll never forget what happened last summer. My name is Chris. I am 19 years old. I live in a small town near Denver, where there's lots of trees and woods. There's a campsite about an hour away from my house that I visited by myself last summer. It was a nice escape from my unstable family, or at least it was supposed to be. All I packed for my trip was 4 different outfits that could last me a week. Some food such as cereal, instant ramen, and sandwich products, and some things to keep me entertained, like my MP3 player and some graphic novels. I also packed a couple DVDs because the description of the cabin stated that there was a TV with a DVD player. I said bye to my family and took off at around noon of that day. The drive was a little over an hour. Before I arrived, I noticed how this campsite is basically isolated from the town because of how much forestation there was in between. I guess that's what it was for, since it was a campsite. Anyways, I arrived at the campsite and was going to approach the main office to get my keys, until I realized that I had already rolled up to where my cabin was, cabin 410. Except it was a little older looking than in the pictures. This still didn't stop me. I was eager to have a place to myself for a week. The other thing I noticed was that a park ranger's car was parked in front of the cabin, and there was a ranger in a uniform sitting on the front porch of the cabin. I pulled into the driveway and got out to meet him. He said hello, and I told him that I was the one staying in the cabin, and he handed me the cabin keys right away. He introduced himself as Ranger Mitchell. I then told him I was Chris, and he replied by saying, "I know," with a weird look on his face. I didn't think much of it though. He told me to call him if I needed anything, and he gave me a card with his info on it. I thanked him, and he told me to have a nice day before driving off. I used the keys to open the front door of cabin 410. The door made a loud creaking noise before revealing the old-fashioned look of the inside. There was a living room with a sofa across from the front door. I set my luggage down next to the sofa and noticed that there was no TV in there. I then got the rest of my luggage out of the car and set it all down around the front room of the cabin. I decided to walk around the place to know where the bedroom and bathrooms were. The master bedroom was upstairs, so of course that's the one I settled in. Across from it was a bathroom, thankfully. The rest of the upstairs was just the end of the hallway that had a closet. The cabin had an eerie feel to it, most likely because of the lighting. How none of the lights were very bright, even though they were all on. It was bright enough to see though, which is all that really mattered to me. I went downstairs to examine the only room I have not yet seen. I opened up the door to see another bedroom, except this one was smaller and had the TV in it. This was a little strange considering that the cabin description online showed the TV in the living room. I figured that maybe the people who stayed in this cabin before I did moved it or something. The first thing I did was sit out on the outside balcony and listen to music on my MP3 while enjoying the view of the forest. I did this for about half an hour. Then I went back inside to get a graphic novel. I was then reading while listening to music on the balcony for a couple more hours. It was actually very relaxing until I noticed something about the cabin next to mine. I looked over to see that there was a couple looking at me through the window of their cabin. When I noticed them, they quickly shut their blinds. I was a little weirded out, so I looked to the other side to see if maybe they were looking at something else. But my cabin was the last one on the road, so I thought that maybe they saw an animal. But then again, why would they shut the blinds right as I noticed them? I just kept reading for a couple more minutes. When I looked over at the window again, there they were, looking at me. But they didn't shut their blinds that time. They just kept looking, I had enough at that point. I walked out the front door of my cabin and approached their front door before knocking. The door was answered by a little boy that looked to be about 10 years old. Hey there, are your parents home? I asked him. Yes, but they're busy right now, he replied. Who are you? He then asked me. Oh, I'm Chris, I'm in cabin 410. As I said this, a look of worry grew on the boy's face. 410? He asked fearfully. The boy then stepped out the front door and looked over at my cabin for a few seconds. He then looked up at me and whispered, That's the bad cabin, but don't worry, he'll protect you. Who? I asked him. The boy then pointed at the window on the top floor of my cabin and said, Him. I looked at the window he was pointing at and could see something looking down at me through the window. This person, or thing, was so oddly shaped that I couldn't tell what it was. I kept looking at it until I heard someone say, Can I help you? I turned to see who was most likely the boy's father standing in the doorway. Yeah, I saw you looking at me suspiciously in your window. I just want to know if something's wrong. The man peered over at the window the boy pointed at, and I looked over as well. Whoever was in there was gone. The man then said to me with a tone, Just pack up your shit and leave, please. He then shut the door and I heard him lock it. I walked back to my cabin while scratching my head, wondering what the fuck had just happened. I then called Ranger Mitchell to tell him about it. He told me over the phone that the family next to me actually lived in their cabin and had seen someone get mauled by a bear near cabin 410 years ago, and that they were just paranoid. What he told me still didn't make sense, so I explained to him that someone is in my cabin and I'm too afraid to go upstairs. He then told me that he was on his way. About 10 minutes later, he still didn't show up, and I began to hear heavy footsteps coming from upstairs.